meeting with someone new always triggers emotions, puzzles, and interest, especially when it happens in the online realm. Today, the internet plays a key role in how people search for their other half and build real relationships. But the person you meet online can turn out to be someone completely different. On the 22nd of November 2013, the police in the small town of Farmington, Minnesota, received a missing person report about 37-year-old Laura Simonson. Since Laura was an adult and independent woman, her relatives did not immediately worry. The police suggested waiting 3 days, hoping that she would return. When Laura did not appear after this deadline expired, the investigators began investigating her disappearance on the 25th of November. It turned out that Laura was the mother of 7 children, 5 daughters and 2 sons. Among her children was her 13-year-old daughter Alice, who needed special care after an accident in the swimming pool, which left her in a wheelchair. Despite all the difficulties, Laura never lost hope and tried to ensure the best for her daughter. As a sign of her love for Alice, Laura got a tattoo with her name and birth date. A few years ago, Laura divorced her husband, and he began taking the children to his place on weekends and holidays. The summer of 2013 represented a turning point in her life. One night, Laura lost her daughter Alice. It later turned out that the girl had heart problems that no one knew about. Laura was very sad about the loss and found support from her mother Mary and her sister Nikki. It was difficult for her to cope with the loss, especially since she had struggled for years with mental problems and mood swings that made communication with her almost impossible. What happened only worsened her condition, and the relatives simply tried to be near her without knowing how they could help. A few months after the tragedy, Laura felt a little better. The family hoped that Laura's life would return to normal tracks. During this time, Laura tried to find comfort on the internet by signing up on a dating website to establish new relationships and contacts. The relatives thought that she was trying in this way to cope with the pain and find someone who would help her forget what had happened. Everyone believed that Laura was gradually recovering, but on the 2nd of November 2013, she unexpectedly made a shocking decision. Laura Simonson left the house and left behind a message. "I am sorry that I am in such a state. I cannot give the children the attention they deserve. The best thing I can do for them is to stay away. I want them not to see me anymore. I love you all and will always love you." After the first emotions had settled, Laura's relatives thought that she wanted to spend some time with a friend to recover and organize her thoughts. Everyone believed that Laura would soon return home with new energy. 3 weeks had passed since Laura disappeared. On the 22nd of November, an unknown man appeared in the yard of the Simons family house and left a note at the back door. In the note, which was addressed to Laura's mother Mary, it said, "Mary, my name is Jeff Madison. Perhaps you know that I have been friends with Laura for a long time. For 2 weeks, I have heard nothing from her and have not seen her. My friends and I are very worried. Please, if you have had contact with her in recent weeks, get in touch with me so we can stop worrying." After reading the note, Laura's mother and sister began to seriously worry. They realized that Laura had indeed had no contact with her relatives in the past 2 weeks. Jeff Madison was an acquaintance she had met on a social network, and their friendship developed quickly. Laura's relatives contacted the police and reported her disappearance, although they did not want to believe the worst until the very end. The situation was immediately full of questions for the investigators. The disappearance of a mother with several children who had only left behind a note, and her unstable emotional state worried everyone. First, the investigator wondered whether Laura could have left voluntarily, but her relatives firmly rejected this version. The search of the house revealed no clues about her whereabouts. It was established that Laura had left her car at home. In the car, the investigators found money, credit cards, and Laura's mobile phone. That was strange because such things are necessary in daily life. Where could Laura have gone, and with whom? Laura Simonson, a 37-year-old woman, had already been missing for 23 days, and the Farmington police began the investigation by questioning her environment. The investigators tried to gather as much information as possible from everyone who knew Laura, including friends and acquaintances from social networks. They paid particular attention to her ex-husband, Troy. In this situation, the children remained with him, which is unusual since mothers normally take their children with them. There might have been disagreements or tensions between the spouses. After the conversation with Troy, however, the investigators concluded that he was not involved in Laura's disappearance. During the course of the investigation, the police discovered many new details. Friends and acquaintances of Laura provided scattered information from which an overall picture was composed. This took a long time, but each new statement helped to refine the direction of the search. At the same time, Laura's family continued to hope for her safe return, maintained contact with the police, and provided every conceivable help with the investigation. The police directed their attention to another man besides Laura's ex-husband. It was Jeff Madison, who had written the letter to Laura's mother. The investigators decided to find and question him. It turned out that Jeff had important information, as he had access to Laura's social media accounts, including Facebook, email, and other online chats. The analysis of the messages showed that Laura began to immerse herself in a world of virtual fantasies with their own rules and games after the incident with Alice. Madison confirmed that Laura indeed frequently communicated with men on an unusual website. The investigators asked him to provide links to this website and data from her user account. However, while they were speaking with Jeff, they had the feeling that he might be misleading the investigation. At this point, the police had no evidence against Madison, so the investigators began to examine the websites that Laura had visited in the last weeks before her disappearance. In the course of the investigation, it turned out that Laura was actively communicating with a user named Handcuffs on one of the websites. In their messages, there were elements of unusual relationships with special rules. They frequently discussed their relationship and exchanged ideas. Eventually, their conversations began to revolve around a personal meeting in real life. The investigators did not yet know who was hiding behind this name, but they suspected that something was not right here. During the investigation, Laura's relatives did not stop hoping for her return. They put up search notices, visited homeless shelters, and showed her photo to passers-by on the city streets. Their hope that someone had seen Laura and that she had not disappeared forever remained unshakable. This event was a shock for the residents of the small town. On the 28th of November 2013, the police distributed flyers with information about the missing Laura Simonson to neighboring cities and states to obtain any possible information about her. The investigators achieved a real stroke of luck when they received a crucial tip. A hotel manager from the neighboring city of Rochester called. She reported that she had seen Laura on the 2nd of November, a Saturday 3 weeks ago. The woman looked exactly like in the photo and barely smiled. She rented a single room and seemed worried. Laura was clearly troubled, and she was not alone. With her was a man who aroused suspicion. The manager noticed that they did not look like a couple who wanted to spend time together. The room documents were filled out and signed by Laura, but the room was paid for by an unknown man. Unfortunately, he paid in cash and left no information about his identity. There were no records for the 2nd of November in the hotel archive. However, there was a video recording from the 3rd of November on which the investigators saw a large white man with dark hair. The manager confirmed that it was the man who was with Laura, but there was a peculiarity. For unknown reasons, the man left the hotel alone, without Laura. The investigators could not understand where she had disappeared to and why the man departed alone. Perhaps Laura left the hotel on the same day on Saturday, but the absence of archive records made it impossible to verify this version. When investigators had the task of finding out the identity of the mysterious man and clarifying his connection to the missing Laura Simonson, more than 2 months had already passed since her disappearance. It was the 12th of January, 2014. The investigators excluded Jeff Madison, an acquaintance of Laura, as a suspect because he did not match the description of the person who was seen at the hotel. Meanwhile, Jeff had found an email address behind which hid a user with the nickname Handcuffs. This address belonged to Steven Zellick, a 52-year-old resident of Milwaukee who worked as a security guard in a large company and had previously been with the police. The investigators contacted the police in Milwaukee and spoke with Steven's former boss. The boss was not surprised when he learned about the investigation. Steven had left the service after being accused of abuse of office. He had already had problems with women in the service before. The former boss confirmed that the person from the hotel and Steven Zellick are one and the same person. After it became clear that Steven, known by the nickname Handcuffs, was possibly the last one to see Laura Simonson, the investigators from Farmington asked their colleagues in Milwaukee to search his house. On the 17th of January, the police were supposed to ensure that Laura was safe in case she was really there. When the police officers came to Zellick, he greeted them politely and reservedly. When he heard that they were looking for 37-year-old Laura Simonson, Zellick said that they had met on a dating website and had written to each other. Laura had sent him photos, but a few months ago her contact had stopped. Zellick allowed his apartment to be searched and the police officers found no traces of Laura or any other woman. Nevertheless, the investigators suspected that Zellick had something to do with her disappearance, although he denied that they had met at the hotel. At this point, there was no evidence against him and the case gradually stagnated. This lasted until the 10th of March 2014, when Laura's relatives continued to pressure the police to find her. The police in Farmington began to consider a more sinister version of events and thought that Zellick might deliberately search for women like Laura to commit crimes. Possibly he transported Laura across the border between Minnesota and Wisconsin without her consent, which would bring the case under FBI jurisdiction. The investigators decided to follow this lead. The FBI agents questioned Zellick again, but this time too he behaved calmly and allowed a search of the apartment. He confirmed the acquaintance with Laura through the dating website and emphasized that this does not violate the law. Zellick also said that Laura had visited other websites and forums on similar topics, where she had many friends, and suggested that the investigators should look there. At the end of the conversation, he was asked to provide a DNA sample, and he agreed. Now the investigators had Zellick's DNA sample, but this did not bring them closer to solving Laura's disappearance. On the 5th of June 2014 in the city of Geneva in the state of Wisconsin, 7 months had passed since Laura Simon, who was 37 years old, had broken off contact. A road construction crew was busy repairing the roadside when one of the workers noticed 2 large suitcases, a black one and a purple one. The workers decided to approach closer, but they were immediately stopped by an unbearable smell. The black suitcase attracted a swarm of flies. The workers immediately called the police. Police officers arrived at the scene and began investigating the area. In each suitcase, important evidence for 2 unknown criminal cases was discovered. In the black suitcase, the experts found traces of a tattoo that was well preserved despite the general condition of the evidence. The tattoo was photographed and the images were sent to police stations throughout the country. The laboratory began examining the ropes with which the black suitcase was wrapped. During the thorough examination, a DNA sample was found on one of the ropes that was not connected to the contents of the suitcases and became an important clue for the investigations. Meanwhile, investigators from Farmington received information about the found suitcases and a photo of the tattoo. This made it possible to identify the missing Laura Simonson. The tattoo was immediately recognized and connected to her case. Since the evidence was found in the state of Wisconsin, investigators from Geneva continued the investigation. The police from Farmington handed over all documents in Laura's case to their colleagues in Geneva. In the meantime, the evidence from the purple suitcase remained unidentified and the identity could not be determined. But at the end of June, the results of the DNA analysis were ready. The data was entered into the police database, and there was a match. The DNA belonged to 52-year-old Steven Zellick. This connected the found evidence with a man who was known under the pseudonym Handcuffs on a special website. On the 25th of June 2014, The investigators called Stephen Zellick directly from his workplace for questioning. Initially, he claimed that he had already said everything he knew. But when the investigators told him about the found suitcases and the DNA on one of the ropes, Zellick changed his statements. His voice was calm and his tone monotonous. He told in detail about each of his actions. The story with the purple suitcase began with his acquaintance with a woman in a forum of a special website. They quickly understood each other and began to communicate. This woman was the 19-year-old Jenny Ramos from Oregon. Jenny had a difficult life. She grew up in foster families, since her biological father lived in Mexico and showed little interest in her fate. Jenny became a mother early, but could not take care of the child and was deprived of her parental rights. From her relatives, she only maintained contact with her grandmother. Last, Jenny called her grandmother and said that she was going on a long journey through the country with a friend. Zellick realized that no one would miss her and invited her to Milwaukee in 2012. He met her at the airport and brought her to a hotel in Kenosha County, state of Wisconsin, where they spent several days. Then he told that on one of the days they did breathing exercises during which something tragic happened. In panic, he packed the evidence in her suitcase and took it out of the hotel. Then he brought it to his home, cleared the food from the refrigerator and put the evidence inside. It remained there for quite a long time. Even when the police came to him for the first time in November 2013 regarding Laura Simonson's case, the evidence was still in the refrigerator and the police officers were literally only a few meters away from discovering it. When the investigators checked information about missing persons with this data, they found that a girl with this name was missing. They requested the dental records of this girl from Oregon to compare them with the found data. On the 28th of June 2014, the analysis confirmed that the found data belonged to 19-year-old Jenny Gomez. Jenny's relatives told that she liked to travel to find herself and figure out what she wanted from life. When she left, they did not worry and expected that she would get in touch when she was ready. During the interrogation, Zellick also told about Laura Simonson. He met Laura in the same way as Jenny and then persuaded her to leave her family and hide. He advised Laura not to renew her driver's license and to leave her credit cards and phone at home. On the 2nd of November, Zellick picked up Laura from her home and brought her to a hotel in Rochester. On the same day, the same scenario repeated as the first time. He hid the evidence in a suitcase and left the hotel room. On the surveillance camera recordings from the 3rd of November, the police saw how Zellick brought a black suitcase out of the hotel. Now it became clear why Laura was not there when he left the hotel on the 3rd of November. After that, the suitcase was kept in the trunk of his car until the 5th of June 2014, until people complained about the smell. Zellick decided to get rid of the evidence and left 2 suitcases by the road. Throughout the entire investigation, Stephen Zellick claimed that both incidents were accidental. However, the found evidence spoke against this. A long rope with his DNA was wrapped 6 or 7 times, which proved that Zellick would have had enough time to stop. On the 30th of March 2016, Stephen pleaded guilty in the case of 19-year-old Jenny Gomez and received 35 years in prison. In February 2017, he was sentenced to 25 years in prison in the case of 37-year-old Laura Simonson. In October of the same year, Zellick received an additional 10 years for evidence suppression. At the place where the evidence was found, the relatives attached a sign with the inscription, "You are gone, but not forgotten," in memory of Laura Simonson and Jenny Gomez. On the 9th of September 1999, the police of Long Island received a disturbing call from a concerned person who reported finding an old barrel with unknown remains in the basement of their house. Investigators arrived at the scene and met the concerned homeowner, Ronald Cohen. He explained that he had recently sold the house and was packing his belongings. When he went down to the basement, he noticed that not all waste had been removed. In the corner stood a large, dirty barrel with a volume of 55 gallons and large labels. On an attached note, it said that the barrel was too heavy to move and would require special equipment for transport because of the weight and chemical markings. Nevertheless, The movers brought the barrel outside. Cohen decided to open it and check the contents. When he removed the lid, an unpleasant smell spread in the air. But that was not the worst part. On the surface, he saw a hand and women's shoes with high heels. Everything was covered with various materials and a viscous green chemical. Cohen said he had lived in this house for 9 years and had never seen this barrel. One could see that the man was shocked. For more than 9 years he had lived in the house, and all this time this barrel had been in the basement. The police noticed nothing unusual in the homeowner's behavior. They conducted a thorough investigation of the entire building, including the basement, to find evidence that could shed light on what happened. But the tank had meanwhile been touched by many, and the hope of finding fingerprints had almost disappeared. The only clue for the investigators was the tank itself and its contents. The tank was sent to the laboratory for analysis. The first thing that caught the specialists' attention was that it was completely filled with small black and white plastic balls the size of peas. To get to the contents, these balls had to be removed for several hours. When the lid of the tank was closed, apparently the oxygen inside was exhausted, which led to the mummification of everything that was in it. After removing the contents, it became clear that it was a woman with dark, shoulder-length hair. Her height was about 150 centimeters, and her age was estimated to be between 25 and 35 years. Notable were the golden fillings on her 2 front teeth. Experts suspected that such fillings are typical for Central America, which could indicate her Latin American origin. The woman wore a leopard coat made of artificial fur and a dress with a floral pattern. On her feet were wool socks and shoes. This clothing style was popular among women in the 60s and 70s. In addition, the woman was in the 8th month of pregnancy. At the bottom of the tank, the investigators discovered a viscous green liquid that turned out to be a mixture of liquid and paint. Inside the tank, they also found a handbag containing a notebook, a makeup set, and a wallet with the business card of a doctor who had been retired for a long time. During the examination, another unusual discovery was made: a plastic stem with leaves. This object will also play a role in the case later. The bag contained no identification papers, but there was a notebook. The notebook was severely damaged. Many entries were smudged or illegible. Therefore, it was handed over to specialists for information recovery. While the experts restored the entries in the notebook, the investigators checked all cases of missing Latin American women in the last 10 years. But none of the cases matched the description of the found woman. It seemed that no one missed this unfortunate woman. Normally, an investigation begins with gathering information about the person, who they were friends with, what connections they had, and what they were occupied with. In this case, the investigators had no information about the victim's identity. Therefore, the investigators decided to begin with examining the house where the barrel was found. The house was built in the year 1959 and had changed 4 owners in the last 30 years. Before the man who found the barrel, 3 different families had lived in the house. All were wealthy, with children, and without problems with the law. The investigation was at a standstill. It was unlikely that any of the homeowners would have kept such a barrel in the basement, even temporarily. When reviewing the case files, the investigator realized that all the crucial evidence lay directly before him, in the barrel itself. His attention was drawn to the inscriptions on the barrel, one of which read, "Rome, New Jersey." It turned out that Rome was a factory for manufacturing barrels. The investigator then went to the factory to continue the investigation. One of the factory workers explained that according to federal regulations, every manufactured container must be marked, as many of them are used for storing dangerous substances. This marking helps to track the containers. Each number on the container carries information. For example, 55 indicates the volume of the container, 55 gallons. The number 3 stands for the wall thickness of the container, which is 3 millimeters. The number 63 shows that the container was manufactured in March 1963. On the green sticker attached to the container is the logo of a chemical company that had previously purchased these containers from the factory. The investigator found out that this chemical company received new owners in the year 1970. They reported that the production of the green paint from this container was discontinued in the same year. The plastic pellets found in the barrel were used to manufacture various items such as toys, chairs, and decorative flowers. This information proved important for the investigation. It became clear that the event connected with this barrel could only have taken place after 1963. The described events date from the 70s, when the production line for green paint was discontinued and barrels were manufactured. Possibly the perpetrator either worked in a plastic factory or had access to one where this green paint was used. However, searching for such a person after 30 years could take a very long time and lead to no result. In the meantime, the experts received the results of the analysis of the notebook that was found in the container. Using modern infrared technologies, they succeeded in restoring the information on the pages of the notebook, and the almost vanished entries became readable. The deciphering of the woman's identity lay directly before the investigators' eyes. On the inside of the cover, they noticed a number preceded by the letter A. Presumably, the woman came from Latin America, and this number could have been her registration number. In the United States, every migrant receives a unique number. After the investigator contacted the Immigration and Naturalization Service, he was able to obtain information about the person with the specified number. It turned out that this was a woman named Reina Angelica Marquin, who arrived from El Salvador in August 1966 at the age of 25 years. Reina's identity was confirmed through a photo from 1960 and her name. The investigators had no clear idea of Reina's goals in America, but they tried to understand who might hinder her plans. In the following days, the investigator called all contacts from Reina's notebook to find clues. The last call was a contact to a company in the textile district of Manhattan. A woman answered the call and showed herself willing to meet and discuss the case. The investigator explained why he had approached her, and she agreed to a meeting to continue the conversation. When Katie Andrade looked at the photo, her eyes filled with tears, and she whispered softly, "My God, she is no longer with us." The investigator, who stood beside her, nodded silently, and Katie began to tell a story that she had kept in her heart for more than 30 years. In the distant year 1967, Katie first met Reina in a Catholic church in Manhattan, New York. When she heard the familiar accent in her voice, Katie could not help but approach her and ask, "Do you happen to come from El Salvador?" Reina smiled and answered affirmatively. "Me too," Katie exclaimed joyfully. Thus began their close friendship, connected by their common homeland. Reina shared her difficulties with Katie, about the divorce and the move to New York last year in the hope of a new life. She worked in a factory in the city center and lived in a Catholic home for girls. Despite all difficulties, Reina always kept a smile and the desire to learn. Reina was known and respected among the members of her church who loved and valued her. Every day after work, she diligently studied English. She met almost daily with her female friends to discuss the news and events of the day. Particularly often, Reina told stories about her beloved, whose name she kept secret even from her best friend. This man remained a mystery, but one day Reina confessed to investigator Katie that her boyfriend was married and they could only meet on certain days. Katie worried greatly about her friend and often advised her to be careful by warning, "Such relationships can lead to unexpected consequences." Reina answered calmly, "I am already expecting a child. Everything will be fine. My friend has promised to leave his wife and rent us an apartment." And strangely, this mysterious man kept his promise. After he had rented the apartment, he insisted that Reina quit her job. He worried about her health and the health of their future child. Katie, on the other hand, thought that the real reason was that he did not want anyone to learn about Rana's condition since he was married. Despite everything, Reina and Katie remained in weekly contact. If Reina did not call first, Katie would make contact herself. Reina always seemed satisfied and told Katie happily that her boyfriend would soon leave his wife. Every month, her boyfriend brought Raina to the doctor, took care of her, brought her food and everything necessary. It seemed that she lacked nothing. Katie believed that everything was going perfectly for her friend. One evening, at the end of the workday, the telephone rang in the office where Katie worked. Katie picked up the telephone receiver and heard the worried voice of her friend Raina. Through her tears, Raina told that she had met her lover's wife. In panic, she repeated that he had told her that she had done it for nothing and that all his promises had been lies. In the 8th month of her pregnancy, tired of waiting for her partner to tell his wife the truth, Raina decided to tell everything herself. After she had calmed down somewhat, she told Katie that she had already called her boyfriend's wife and told her the truth. In response, her lover called Raina and showed himself very dissatisfied with her behavior. Katie dropped everything and hurried to her friend. When Katie arrived at Raina's apartment, she noticed that the door was ajar. She went inside and called several times for her friend, but there was no answer. When Katie entered the apartment, her gaze immediately fell on a shoe that lay on the kitchen floor. On the kitchen table stood a dish that was still warm. Concerned, Katie immediately went to the police station. There they listened to her attentively, however refused to file a report since too little time had passed since the incident. The investigators knew cases in which men disappeared with pregnant lovers, and therefore did not want to spend resources searching for the woman. But Katie was certain that her friend was in danger. Back at work, she tirelessly dialed her number, but no one answered. The worry about Raina did not leave Katie for a minute, and she thought about her every day. Since she did not know whom to turn to for help, and had no contacts to her relatives in El Salvador, Katie felt completely helpless. Since then, Katie heard nothing more from Raina, but was always convinced that something terrible had happened to her friend. After the investigators had received the address of the Catholic orphanage from Kathy, where Raina had previously lived, they were able to find all necessary data. From the documents, it emerged that Raina lived there for a certain period of time, with exact dates of her arrival and departure. According to Kathy, Raina left the orphanage in the 2nd or 3rd month of her pregnancy, and she was found in the 8th month. Thus, it was established that Raina ended up in the barrel in March or April 1967. Thanks to Kathy's information, the investigators also learned that Raina had an affair with a married man, just like the 3 previous owners of the house in which the barrel was found. The examination of the property documents showed that the part of the house in which the barrel was stored did not belong to the original plan of the house. This addition was only erected in 1981. This indicated that the barrel could have gotten into the basement at that time. The investigators had to find out who had carried out this addition. The investigators focused on Stan Miller, the 2nd owner of the house. Miller reported that he had moved into the house in 1972 and immediately learned about the illegal addition. In 1981, he had all necessary documents issued. He also knew about the existence of the barrel, but thought that it had remained after the construction work and paid no attention to it. He advised the investigators to speak with Howard Ahrens, who had lived in the house before him. The investigators determined that Howard Ahrens was 40 years old at the time when Raina ended up in the barrel, was married and father of 3 children. Although he was considered a law-abiding citizen, one circumstance caught the investigators' attention. The success of his career was connected with his father-in-law, who had made him a partner in a plastic products company. At the bottom of the container were green paint and a plastic sheet. The first owner of the house, who worked in a company that manufactured such materials and artificial flowers, used this paint for coloring products. Wilkins worked almost 2 decades in this factory together with his father-in-law and a colleague named Alvin Hauptmann. When the company closed in 1972, he sold his house in Chicago and moved with his family to Florida. Investigators set out for Florida to speak with Wilkins's father. But first, they decided to check their assumptions and meet with his former partner, Shantanu, who also lived in Florida. Malcolm was shown the container and he recognized it immediately, saying, "Yes, such containers were used for storing green paint." He also recognized the balls that were found in it. The investigators turned to Hauptmann with questions about his former partner. Hauptmann told them that Howard was a technically skilled, strong, and enduring person. He also mentioned that Vince had a young Latin American girlfriend with long, black hair and gold teeth. The investigators understood that this was about Raina. Hauptmann did not remember her name, but knew that she had worked in the factory for about a year and one day simply did not come to work anymore, after which no one saw her again. Hauptmann also remembered a strange incident. Once an angry landlord from New Jersey called him, where Wilkins had rented an apartment for Regina. The landlord threatened that if Howard did not pay the rent, all things would be thrown onto the street. When Hauptmann delivered the message, he immediately got into his car and drove away. In the evening, he brought back a television and a suitcase. In 1967, Hauptmann did not understand what was going on, but 3 decades later, the investigators were convinced that Elkin had taken all things from Raina's apartment. At this time, Raina was already in the basement of his house. On the 9th of September 1999, a week had passed since Raina was found under the house on Long Island. The investigators stood at the door of Howard's house in Florida. Howard looked shattered when he saw them. For half an hour, Howard insisted that he had never seen this tank and its contents. The investigators asked him, "Did you know the woman who worked in the factory?" Wilkins answered, "Yes, long ago, but our relationship was brief. My father-in-law found out and insisted that we separate immediately, which I did." When asked about her name, he answered that he did not remember. When shown the photo, he claimed he had never seen the woman. The investigators explained that they were certain that he had gotten rid of her and hidden her in the tank. Suddenly, the conversation was interrupted by a phone call. Vince's wife called. In the conversation with her, Wilkins did not mention the investigators' visit with a word. After the conversation, he informed the investigators that they would have to leave the house. Obviously, they had no other choice. When the investigators came to the house in Florida, they had no arrest warrant. Before they left, they said, "We will return with an arrest warrant." As soon as they went out, one of the investigators called the chief to request an arrest warrant for Howard. On the 10th of September, Howard's wife reported to the police that her husband was missing. Howard Wilkins disappeared early in the morning and left his wallet at home. The police began searching and checked all possible places where he might be. After 45 minutes, they found him in a friend's house who was on vacation. Howard sat in the back seat of a car in the garage and showed no signs of life. The investigators had no doubt about the reasons for what had happened. After recognizing the consequences of his actions, Howard Aarons decided to end his life to escape the court proceedings. In the New York laboratory, the DNA of Howard and a child was compared, and a match was established. Raina lay in the tank for 30 years. All this time, Elkin lived a normal life and raised 3 children. Ina's friend, Katie Andrade, still blames herself and says, "I thought if I had come 5 or 10 minutes earlier, Raina would still be alive." The police found Raina's family. Her mother did not know for 30 years what had happened to her daughter and where she was. Raina was transferred to El Salvador, where she was buried on the family property. Shortly thereafter, Raina's mother also died, and she was buried next to her daughter.